What would you do if in a single day you lost your job, your house was destroyed, all your children died, your health collapsed into unbearable pain, and the worst part, you had done nothing wrong? Would you still lift your hands and say, "Blessed be the name of the Lord"? This isn't a hypothetical for Job. It's his life. And for centuries, the question has burned in the hearts of believers and skeptics alike. Why would a loving, just God allow such crushing suffering to a righteous man? Was it punishment, a cruel test, an example, a mystery we're not meant to know? The book of Job isn't just a story about one man's pain. It's a window into heaven's courtroom, the reality of spiritual warfare, the mystery of divine sovereignty, and the triumph of faith over the accusations of hell. Let's walk slowly through this, answering the question in multiple dimensions, because the why behind Job's suffering is not one-dimensional. It's layered like a diamond, and each facet reveals something about God, about Satan, and about us. 1. The heavenly courtroom. God's glory on trial. Most Bible stories start on earth and move upward toward God. Job starts in heaven. In Job 1:6-12, we are invited into a divine council meeting. The sons of God, angelic beings, present themselves before the Lord, and among them is Satan, the adversary. God doesn't just let Satan bring accusations, God himself points out Job. "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil?" Job 1:8. Satan's reply is the central accusation of the entire book. Does Job fear God for nothing? Job 1:9. In other words, Job doesn't really love you. He loves the benefits you give him. Take those away and he'll curse you. And here's the first answer to our question. God allowed Job to suffer because his glory was being displayed and defended in the face of Satan's accusation. The trial wasn't about Job's past. It was about heaven proving that God is worthy of love even when life collapses. Job became a living testimony that God can be worshipped for who he is, not just for what he gives. 2. It wasn't punishment, it was trust. Many people instinctively think suffering means God is angry or punishing, but Job 1:1 destroys that idea. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. Even God himself says in Job 2:3 that Job was blameless. So here's the second answer. God allowed Job to suffer because he trusted Job to carry a testimony that would echo through history. Sometimes the storms that come are not because you're weak, but because heaven knows you can stand. Your endurance becomes a sermon for generations you'll never meet. James 5:11 confirms this. You have heard of the perseverance of Job and seen the end intended by the Lord, that the Lord is very compassionate and merciful. The end intended was not Job's ruin, but his restoration and eternal testimony. 3. To expose the accuser and silence his lies. Satan's main weapon is accusation. Revelation 12:10. He accuses us before God and accuses God to us. In Job's trial, Satan accused Job, claiming he was selfish in his worship. God, implying he buys loyalty with blessings. By enduring without cursing God, Job shattered both accusations. This is the third answer. God allowed Job to suffer to expose and defeat the lies of Satan. In the unseen realm, every time Job refused to curse God, it was like a hammer blow to the kingdom of darkness. 4. To take Job deeper into the knowledge of God. By the end of the book, Job says something astonishing. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Job 42:5. Think about that. Job was already blameless before all this happened, yet there was still a deeper revelation of God he had never experienced. The fourth answer is this. God allowed Job to suffer so Job could move from knowing about God to truly seeing God. Pain has a way of burning away second-hand faith. In the ashes, Job had an encounter with God's majesty, sovereignty, and wisdom that reshaped his entire understanding. 5. To demonstrate worship without conditions. Job's most famous line comes right after he loses his children and possessions. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Job verse 1:21. This is radical worship, blessing God when nothing in life makes sense. The fifth answer is, God allowed Job to suffer to show the world what unconditional worship looks like. True worship is not God, I love you because, it's God, I love you regardless. 6. To shape Job's character and humility. Although Job was righteous, by the middle of the book he begins to defend himself a little too strongly, almost challenging God's justice. God answers in chapters 38-41 with a breathtaking display of his sovereignty. This wasn't humiliation, it was transformation. The sixth answer, God allowed Job to suffer to refine him, not from sin into righteousness, but from righteousness into deeper humility and awe. 7. To give Job a greater reward. Job's story doesn't end in ashes. In Job 42:10-17, God restores Job's fortunes, doubling his livestock, blessing him with more children, and giving him a long life. But the real reward was not double sheep. It was a double portion of revelation, intimacy, and eternal honor. The seventh answer, God allowed Job to suffer because he planned to reward him beyond what he had before, both in this life and in the eternal record of Scripture. 8. Job's suffering foreshadowed the suffering and victory of Christ. When we read Job carefully, it's clear his experience was not just a personal tragedy. It was a prophetic shadow of a greater story yet to come. Job was innocent, God himself declared him. Blameless and upright, Job 1:8. Targeted by Satan, the adversary specifically sought permission to strike him down. Misunderstood by friends, his companions assumed his suffering must be punishment for hidden sin. Abandoned in pain, left in misery without human comfort, vindicated in the end. God restored him and silenced his accusers. Now compare this with Jesus. Innocent, Pilate said, I find no fault in him. John 19:4. Targeted by Satan, tempted in the wilderness. Matthew 4:1-11. And opposed throughout his ministry. Misunderstood by friends, even his closest disciples could not grasp the necessity of his suffering. Matthew 16:21-23. Abandoned in pain, all the disciples forsook him and fled. Matthew 26:56. Vindicated in the end, God raised him from the dead, giving him supreme authority. Philippians 2:9-11. Job's trial functioned like a living preview of the suffering Messiah. By enduring with integrity, Job foreshadowed the ultimate innocent sufferer, Jesus Christ, who would endure not just personal loss, but take upon himself the sins of the world. The parallel is important. Job's restoration was double what he lost, but Christ's victory brought eternal restoration for all who believe. Job's story ends with earthly blessing. Christ's ends with eternal redemption. This gives us another direct answer to the main question. God allowed Job to suffer so the world could recognize centuries later the nature and glory of Christ's suffering, and understand that in Jesus, every trial finds its ultimate resolution. If you're watching this on YouTube, and this teaching helped you understand Job's suffering in a new way, click the like button so others can find this video. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss more in-depth Bible explanations like this. And please share this video with someone going through a hard season. It could give them the clarity and encouragement they've been searching for. Thank you.